After watching dozens of videos and reading up on different patterns, I finally found a mask that showed the most promise for keeping a tight seal on the face and for filtering out airborne droplets. Unfortunately, the pattern I found, which was promoted by University of Florida Health, was meant for a fabric that's typically only found in hospital settings. So I set out to change the pattern into one that could be made at home with materials that had been recommended for homemade masks. After a couple of hours of fiddling with it, I got it to work. With that said, here's what you'll need. 2 copies of the mask pattern, linked in the information below this video, preferably printed on cardstock or other sturdy material. You'll also need a 3rd copy printed on regular paper, not shown here, and I'll show you how to cut them in a moment. Tightly woven 100% cotton fabric pre-washed, non-fusible interfacing or other washable non-woven material, scissors, sewing clips or paper clips, straight pins, a pen, bias tape, 16 to 18 gauge craft wire, thread, and a sewing machine. You'll also need a pair of flat or needle nose pliers and a wire cutter. The first thing you'll need to do is cut out your patterns. For your first cardstock pattern, all you need to do is just cut it out around the outside lines, but cut out the V along the dashed lines. Then you'll cut along the lines on the sides of where the straps are to be placed and fold these small sections in. When you're done, it will look like this with the strap marker tabs folded back. Now grab your paper copy of the pattern. The pattern as is doesn't fold properly for regular fabric, so we're going to fix it. Don't worry about cutting it all out, you're just going to cut out the V's on the sides. Cut on the dashed line, not on the solid line. Cut straight across at the bottom and at an angle at the top. Next, cut along the solid lines from the top of the V up a couple of inches on each side and discard the extra paper from the edges. Now you'll fold the 2 sides of the V together. Make sure the 2 sides of the V are exactly aligned. Then, with the curved edge you just cut on top, trace along that curved edge with your pen and then unfold. Repeat this on the other side. Finally, you'll extend the line from the bottom solid line under the letter A out to your traced line. Do the same on the other side where the letter B is. Next, you'll cut along the lines you've created and along the bottom of the mask pattern. You don't have to cut all the way to the letter E, but you can if you like. Now take the other piece of printed cardstock and lay the cut paper pattern on top of it, aligning the edges. Then, trace around the edges of the little tabs you created at A and B. Now you can cut out your cardstock pattern. As you cut, follow the lines you traced and all solid lines except for the V's on the sides. Cut those out at the dashed lines like you did on the paper copy. This completes your pattern. Now you'll prepare to cut 2 pieces of your cotton fabric. I prefer to fold the fabric in half, right sides facing each other, so I can cut out both pieces at once. If you choose to do this, make sure you're using a good pair of scissors that can handle cutting through a double layer of fabric. Trace the pattern with your extended tabs onto the wrong side of the fabric. Now use your other cardstock pattern to mark where the straps will go. I like to go ahead and mark out my pattern multiple times. I find that on a piece of 42-inch fabric, if I place the marks fairly close together, I can easily fit 4 patterns onto the fabric. When you cut out your fabric, you don't want to cut out the V's on the sides. Those marks are there to show you where to sew, not where to cut. Though you can just cut straight across from corner to corner, I prefer to mark it on the fabric so I know I'm cutting a straight line. You can use one of your scrap pieces of cardstock to trace the lines if you like. When it comes time to cut, you won't cut out those V's and you won't cut along the marks for the straps. You'll cut only around the outside of the entire pattern. But before you cut, pin around the outside of the fabric. I like to use 5 pins, one at each top corner, one in the V on each side, and one at the bottom. After pinning, I like to roughly cut around the pattern markings to make it easier to cut out the rest of the pattern. Remember, cut around the outside lines and do not cut the side V's. You should now have 2 pieces of cut fabric, but you'll only have markings on one. Next, you'll trace the pattern onto a piece of non-fusible interfacing or other non-woven material. I already had a large stockpile of pre-cut interfacing that I use for embroidery projects. It's not quite as big as the pattern, but once the mask is made, it fills about the same amount of space in the mask as an insertable filter, so I decided to use what I already had. If you're using a larger piece of interfacing, you'll be tracing all the way around the pattern. Just like we did with the cotton fabric, you'll cut a straight line between the 2 sides of the V's, but you'll still need to trace the V's so you know where to sew. As before, you can mark a straight line from point to guide you. Pull apart your 2 pieces of cotton fabric. Place the unmarked piece of fabric right side down and place the interfacing on top, marked side up. As you can see, I did not cut out the V's on the interfacing. Also, because my interfacing is smaller, I had to mark the V's on this piece of fabric as well. Align the edges of the interfacing in the fabric. Use 3 pins to hold it in place, 1 in the seam allowance at the top and 2 in the seam allowances near the end of each bottom tab. Next, flip the fabric over and fold up one of the tabs so that the fold is at the center of the tip of the V and the sides of the fabric line up along the edge. Use a sewing clip or paper clip to hold the fold in place. Repeat this on the other side. Getting the interfacing and fabric to fold together can sometimes be a little fiddly, but it's doable. Then you'll take this to the sewing machine and sew along the marked lines on each side. I like to sew across it twice, once in each direction. Do the same thing with the other piece of fabric, but without a layer of interfacing. Once it's sewn, you can see when you pop the seam in, this is given a bit of shape to the mask. You can now cut off the extra fabric on the inside of each dart. Leave about 1/8 of an inch of fabric so the seam doesn't rip out. Next, take your fabric and interfacing piece and place it interfacing side down. Then be sure your darts are pushed so that the right side of your other piece of fabric pops outward, and place this piece of fabric on top of the other one with right sides facing each other. Take a moment to ensure the pieces are correctly aligned. Then you'll take this to the sewing machine and sew around the entire outside of the fabric except for the bottom V. Before you sew, you'll place the 4 straps in the correct spots, facing toward the opening so they can be sewn into the mask. Let's look at how to make the straps. Double fold bias tape comes folded in half with the edges tucked inside. You'll need to sew near the folded edge all the way down the length of the bias tape. Then you can cut 4 18-inch long pieces to use as your straps. Here's a helpful hint. The original pattern calls for 20-inch straps, but as bias tape comes in yards and 18 inches is half a yard, I'm able to make more straps out of my bias tape with 18-inch straps, and I find that it's plenty long to tie. If you're making a mask for someone with a larger head though, you might go ahead and cut 20-inch straps. To place the straps, peel back the top layer of cotton fabric and place a strap between the 2 fabric pieces with the long end hanging out at the large bottom V of the mask. Align the end of the strap with the edge of the fabric and make sure the strap is lined up in the markings you made on the fabric for strap placement. Then pin the strap in place. I know my arm was in the way on this one, but you'll see it a bit better in a moment. Pull the fabric apart again and put the other 3 straps between the 2 layers of cotton fabric. Place each strap so that it hangs out the bottom of the mask and align it in the marks you've made for the straps. Pin each strap in place. I find it easier to put the strap too far through the fabric and then slowly guide it into the spot where I want it. Once you have all of your straps pinned in place, now you can sew all the way around the outside of the mask except for the bottom V where you'll be turning it right side out. You'll need to feed all of the straps under the presser foot so that you can start sewing. Leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. Don't forget to remove any pins as you get to them. When you get to the darts, you may need to raise and lower your presser foot so it doesn't get caught on the extra layers of fabric. To turn at a corner, leave the needle down and then lift the presser foot, turn your fabric to where you need it, put the presser foot back down, and then continue sewing. Be sure to keep your fabric aligned at all times. To better secure each strap, first stitch over it, then back stitch back over it, and then continue stitching forward. Repeat this for each strap. Sew straight across until you get to the end of the edge of the V. Then cut your thread. Now you can flip your mask inside out. Pull apart the 2 pieces of cotton fabric where your straps are sticking out and gently push all of the fabric through that hole at the bottom V. It takes a little bit of working, but if you keep at it, you'll get your entire mask right side out. Next, we'll add the wire that forms the seal around your nose. Measure out a piece of wire that's just a little bit shorter than 5 inches long. Then use your wire cutters to cut off that piece of wire. Then take your pliers and fold each end over so the sharp end bends back where it's touching the rest of the wire. This will ensure the wire doesn't cut through the fabric. Be sure to hold the wire turned the same way up on each end so the finished wire will lay flat in your mask. Now you'll put the wire into the mask. There will be 2 pockets in your mask. One will have no extra fabric sticking up, and one will have the seam allowance of interfacing and fabric sticking out into the pocket. Put the wire into the pocket without the extra seam material so it's easier to keep it flush with the top of the mask. Push it all the way up to the seam and center it between the 2 top straps. Then you'll sew down from the inside edge of one strap about 1/4 inch, across, and then back up to the inside edge of the other strap to form a pocket for the wire. You can see I've made my pocket for the wire, and it will now allow the mask to bend to hold its shape around the nose. The last thing you need to do is to sew the bottom of the mask together. Before you do, you'll want to push out the corners that will join up to form the bottom of the mask under your chin. Use a pen or other semi-blunt object to push out the corners near the darts so that when you sew these edges together, you'll have a clean corner to sew to. Decide which side is going to be the front and fold the mask in half, front sides together. Line up all the edges and make sure that those corners come together. When you sew, you won't sew to that dart, you're only going to sew to that corner. As you join the bottom edges of the mask together, you'll sew along the raw edges using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, but when you get to the corner, you'll want to sew the bottom of the mask as close to the edge as you can, only about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, all the way to that corner. You can see I've sewn a 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch seam allowance. Once that's done, you can now flip the mask right side out by bending the wire and pushing the fabric through. The last thing you'll need to do is to reinforce that bottom seam. Stitch and backstitch about 8 stitches or so across this area back and forth where the two sides meet. Here's what it looks like with the reinforcing stitches in place. You can see it's a much stronger seam now. It's a little awkward to put in the machine, but it's worth it to make sure that your stitches don't come apart. Make sure your mask is pushed all the way right side out, and you're done. You can trim away any stray threads that are sticking out anywhere. Here's how you put the mask on. If you're like me and you have a lot of long hair, you'll need to put it up in a ponytail first. I like to put my ponytail at a height about the same as the top of my ears. Now grab your mask and make sure that the wire is bent at the nose. Place it over your face, pull the top straps back, and tie them above your ponytail if you have one. If you don't have one, find a spot at the back of your head where it feels most comfortable and secure. Next, you'll grab the bottom of the mask and pull it down and secure it underneath your chin. Pull the bottom straps to the back of your head and tie them at the base of your skull. This part always takes me a little bit longer because I'm trying not to tie my hair into the straps. Finally, push down on the wire against your nose and cheeks until you get a firm seal. Now you should have a good seal all the way around the outside of the mask. To take off the mask, first you'll start by untying the bottom ties. Then untie your top ties and hold on to the loose ends of the straps. Pull the mask straight off of your face and immediately put it in the wash or a bag for masks. Don't touch your face and be sure to wash your hands. I hope this tutorial helps you make a mask with a better seal than most of the mask patterns out there on the internet. But just a reminder, a good mask is not a substitute for social distancing. A mask should be used when you need to go out, but it's still best to stay home to stay safe.